Hey everybody, Brady here, also known as the War Hamster, bringing you another episode of the Re-Federalist Report, where we are on episode 31 of our review of James Madison's notes from the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. Joining me, as he is almost every week, my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Good to be here as always. Thanks for having me as a part of this. And as I always stress, folks, if you're new, check out the past episodes. In a sense, it's sort of like, your favorite series, and then you go, oh man, I missed the beginning of the story. They're all available. Just go back, look for the episodes to show Madison's notes. And I have placed a list of links on douglasvgibbs.com a couple of times, so you may be able to find it there. Just go in the search bar and put Re-Federalist and it'll find it. So very good. Let's get moving.
Yeah, it's a great exercise, everyone. You should go back and watch from the beginning. If you're homeschooling your kids, just start on episode 1 and go through that. If you really want to know how the Constitution turned out the way it did, and more importantly, why, what did the founders want to accomplish? More importantly, what were they afraid of accomplishing? Too much government and all that kind of stuff. These debates are, they're going on in real time. 239 years ago. Right?
And my studies of Madison's notes way back, I mean, we're going back 20 plus years, about 20 years ago when I got really deep. I had read them before, but I finally started getting deep into it when I'm, 19 years, when I met someone who was my mentor back in 2007. And when I got deep into these study notes of his writings regarding the Constitutional Convention, and I want this to be your word as we go into today. It is what brought me to the understanding that it was all about. My wife cracks up because I say this word all the time. I use it almost ad nauseum. Balance. That's what they were searching for, is balance. All right, let's do this.
Yeah, and just to emphasize, the review of where we've been, the real balance they're trying to find is that balance between the large, more populous states and the smaller states. We don't want either
part of it.
Yeah, but that's one of the biggest issues that's been going on for like a month, and they're just trying to figure out how do we make sure that the big can't bully the small, or the small can't gang up on the big.
Right, man. You also want a bigger, stronger government that can handle the issues with power, but yet not so powerful that it's chewing up and eating up the individual states. So there's a balance there as well. And, there's a balance between slavery and anti-slavery. All of these balances are coming in. But I agree that going in, one of their biggest fears and one of the balances they were searching for was to make sure that, for lack of a better way of saying it, that the states could all just get along without there being issues of too much power on one side or the other, and disagreements that can't be resolved. And the way to do it, as they discover along the way, is to make sure that all of the voices, regardless of what type of factions we have, be it large population or low population, slave, anti-slave, whatever, that all the factions have a voice. They, as Madison explains, the Federalists tend to set the factions against each other, not majority rule, not the loudest voice or the loudest, squeakiest wheel gets the grease kind of thing. And so once again, balance. It's all about balance. And it's a tough balancing act.
Yeah, it's crystal clear. They do not want a democracy in any way, shape, or form.
No.
They want a republic. And the real key difference, and we just need to emphasize this going in a republic, in a democracy, you get 50% of the votes plus one. You can just willy-nilly change anything you want. In the minority, that 49.9% loses all their rights. In a republic, the minority still has rights, checks, and balances. You cannot just overrun them with a popular vote or a population center.
When we last left, go ahead.
When we last left off, they pretty much come to the conclusion we're going to have a bicameral legislature. They're debating whether bills that have to do with money should be initiated in the People's House, whereas the second house, which is the Senate, would have some kind of veto over that. And that's really the debate right now, is how they're going to balance the power out between the two branches of the legislature. They've already gone through how they're going to be apportioned, and all that. So With no further ado, let's dive in. Okay, we last left off on Friday, July 6, 1787. The last person to speak was none other than the great Benjamin Franklin. And he's talking about as the danger or difficulty that might arise from a negative of the second, that's the Senate, where the people would not be proportionally represented. It might easily be got over by declaring that there should be no such negative, or if it will not do, by declaring that there shall be no such branch at all. A lot of the comparisons are between the British House of Lords, House of Commons issues. And once again, we are not the same as England, but we do use a lot of their examples.
It's always fascinating to me if they use the word negative and not negate or something like that. And when I first met my friend Tim Curlin, my mentor, Loki, he would use the word negative quite a bit. And I always, in the beginning, it kind of like, that's why would he say net? We don't say that. No, we don't, but they did. And once you start reading the notes, and I know it seems something small, but to me, it stands out because one of their fears was this government acting on a negative against state sovereignty, but they didn't want the states being able to pose a negative on the federal government in manners that could cause chaos and once again balance. And so, so when they do allow those things to happen, it's for a reason. It's important, and that's one of the things I've learned because most of the things that they discuss that should be able to negative this or negative that, like the federal Congress would be able to negative state laws. I mean, they absolutely wanted nothing to do with it. But there are a handful of things in the Constitution where that negative can happen, and so it tells you how important those few are. And when we come across them, I'll point them out. All right, go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Martin, this is Luther Martin, not to be confused with Martin Luther.
I've always found that fascinating too.
Well, I think that probably has a lot to do with what he's named after.
Perhaps.
Which is interesting though, because he's from Maryland, which is the Catholic state, and obviously Martin Luther was pretty much the first Protestant. But anyway,
pretty much, yeah.
We'll get into Maryland a bit today. Martin said it was understood in the committee that the difficulties and disputes which had been apprehended should be guarded against in the detailing of the plan. What he's referring to is they've been bickering in full session for about a month on these small issues, so they decided we'll put together a committee of 5 people to go off for 2 days, come back with a recommendation, and see where we got. Did that shorten the debate? I don't know. They're still debating this committee recommendation, but perhaps that's what he's referring to when they say the committee. James Wilson says that difficulties and disputes will increase with the attempts to define and obviate them. Queen Anne was obliged to dissolve her parliament in order to terminate one of these obstinate disputes between the two houses, House of Lords, House of Commons. Had it not been for the mediation of the crown, no one can say what the result would have been.
This is actually a very astute observation by Wilson without him realizing it at the time. While they're discussing the different houses of Congress, what really winds up happening is they needed a mediator between the states because each of the states are individual independent. And this became a discussion as they proceed. Go ahead.
The point is still subjudice in England. He approved of the principles laid down by the Honorable President, Dr. Franklin, his colleague, as to the expediency of keeping the people informed of their money affairs, but thought they would know as much and be as well satisfied in one way as in the other. General Pinckney, South Carolina, was astonished at this.
The older Pinckney.
Say again?
The older Pinckney.
Yes, there are 2 Pinckneys. Was astonished that this point should have been considered as a concession. He remarked that the restriction to money bills had been rejected on the merits singly considered by 8 states against 3, and that the very states which now called it a concession were then against it as a nugatory or improper in itself.
Notice how they're talking about how these financial issues for the country basically is going to be such a discussion, such a difficulty, such an argument. It ain't going to get any better kind of attitude. Then we fast forward to modern days, and I kind of feel that same way. This, of course, is really coming down to who gets to start that conversation, who gets to have say in that conversation. While there's a feeling that it ought to be the voice of the people, there's also concern about making it the voice of the people.
Yeah,
Continue.
and the other way of looking at it is, you've got basically the split between 7 tiny states and 6 big states. 6 big states know they're going to be footing most of the federal bill
Mm-hmm.
because they've got, bigger economies. Well, are the 7 states going to be able to tell them what to do with their money? Or does it go back to the people's house? And these are important questions.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, they are very important. Of course, we ignore those things. Obamacare. Sorry, that one's stuck.
Federal debt.
On the question whether the clause relating to money bills in the report of the committee consisting of a member from each state should stand as part of the report, we've got a divided, an aye, a divided, an aye, a no, an aye, an aye, a no, an aye, a no, and a divided. I don't think that carried.
No.
A question was then raised whether the question was carried in the affirmative, there being but 5 ayes out of 11 states present. So it's parliamentary procedure stuff.
Mm-hmm.
None of these are final votes, so we don't have to worry about them too much, and they will change their minds as times go on.
Oh yeah, the change of mind, that is constant. Some of them are good though. You've heard me say this before. Watching Madison slowly heading us in the right direction, for example.
Okay, continuing on. That's the end of that day. We're going to go to July 7th. Is that right? Nope, hang on. I got myself lost. Okay, yeah. Now we go to July 7th. My apologies, people. Shall the clause allowing each state 1 vote in the second branch stand as part of the report is being taken up? Elbridge Gary, this is the critical question. He had rather agree to it than have no accommodation. A government short of a proper national plan, if generally acceptable, would be preferable to a proper one, which, if it could be carried at all, would operate on discontented states. He thought it would be best to suspend the question until the committee yesterday appointed should make a report.
Now, keep in mind here, we're trying to decide if a state should have only 1 vote in this branch. Should one person be able to represent a state? This becomes also a question on the floor as well. All right, continue.
No, it's a really important point because there's a reason they got the 2. Mr. Sherman supposed that it was the wish of everyone that some general government should be established. Okay, that's a fundamental point. That's why we're here in the first place. We need a stronger government. An equal vote in the second branch would, he thought, be most likely to give it the necessary vigor. The small states have more vigor in their governments than the large ones. The more influence, therefore, the large ones have, the weaker will be the government. We're saying in small states, yes, the people have a bigger voice. In the large states, it will be most difficult to collect the real and fair sense of the people. Fallacy and undue influence will be practiced with most success. California. And improper men will most easily get into office. California.
So this is supporting this argument. The smaller the representation, the number of people represented, the closer these people are to the voice of the people.
Yeah, and something I very much agree with, having been from one extreme in California, where a state senator represents 40 million people, to living in New Hampshire, where you have actually the smallest number of people per representative in the state legislature of any state, and it's actually probably the best run state on an internal level. So, I mean, I've lived both of the extremes now, and I certainly agree with Sherman's argument. If they vote by states in the second branch, and each state has an equal vote, there must be always a majority of states as well as a majority of the people on the side of public measures, and the government will have decision and efficacy. If this be not the case in the second branch, there may be a majority of the states against public measures, and the difficulty of compelling them to abide by the public determination will render the government feebler than it has ever yet been.
See, that last part, I'm not so sure here. He's basically saying, you get too much disagreement, too much debate, and then nothing gets done. Debate equals liberty. I want it to be difficult. I want there to be, me personally, that the government has to really work it out, and that isn't feeble. That is forcing them to come to some type of agreement or change of mind or compromise.
Yeah, the problem is the extreme of that, and what we're seeing in modern day Senate, like we can't even get the Save America Act passed, and
Well,
just to
yeah,
get someone's vote, it comes with bribes. You want to vote up.
and granted, also remember these folks in this convention are coming from an even worse case scenario from the Articles of Confederation, where it took 100% in order to agree on anything.
Yes,
So,
and little Rhode Island could veto everything. That's the tyranny of the majority, or sorry, tyranny of the minority.
right.
It would be 12-1 on everything, and Rhode Island would just sit there and say no.
Yeah. Once again, we're looking for balance.
And that's part of the argument I'm having with several people online is, this was basically an insurrection, this entire meeting in Philadelphia, because Rhode Island wasn't there, and it had to change it to amend the Articles of Confederation. It had to be unanimous, and yet they're going to say they're going to pass this Constitution with only 9 votes. So are they completely, is it total insurrection? The answer is yes, it is, because what was working.
It's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
I like your argument. I like the argument. That's a good one. All right, go ahead.
Mr. Wilson was not deficient in a conciliating temper, but firmness was sometimes a duty of higher obligation. Conciliation was also misapplied in this instance. It was pursued here rather among the representatives than among the constituents, and it would be of little consequence if not established among the latter, and there could be little hope of it being established among them if the foundations should not be laid in justice and right. Get it right, people, because the people will never accept it. Doesn't matter if we agree on it. It's got to be ratified. Question: shall the word stand as part of the report? 1 eye, 2 eyes, 3 eyes, 4 eyes, 5 eyes, 6 eyes. I believe that one is going to. Several votes were given here in the affirmative or were divided because another final question was to be taken on the whole report. I know it's confusing language, people, but we'll get the votes. It'll work itself out. Mr. Gary thought it would be proper to proceed and enumerate and define the powers to be vested in the general government before a question on the report should be taken as to rule of representation of the second branch. How you can determine who's in the second branch until you know what they're going to be able to do. It's a good point here. Madison observed that it would be impossible to say what powers could be safely and properly vested in the government before it was known in what manner the states were to be represented in it. So there's chicken and egg argument going on here, right, Doug?
Pretty much, yeah.
I don't think Madison's right. He was apprehensive that if a just representation were not the basis of government, it would happen, as it did when the Articles of Confederation were depending, that every effectual prerogative would be withdrawn or withheld, and the new government would be rendered as impotent and as short-lived as the old. Mr. Patterson would not decide whether the privilege concerning money bills were a valuable consideration or not, but he considered the mode and rule of representation in the first branch as fully so, and that after the establishment of that point, the small states would never be able to defend themselves without an equality of votes in the second branch. There was no other ground of accommodation. His resolution was fixed. He would meet the large states on that ground and no other. For himself, he should vote against the report because it yielded too much. It's a pretty powerful statement there. This is Patterson from New Jersey. The New Jersey plan stands in contradiction to the Virginia plan, small states versus large.
But once again, we've got two extremes here, and they're trying to decide which extreme.
Governor Morris.
You're seeing the compromise develop, but they're still arguing the extremes.
Yeah, why don't you just lay it out what the two plans are real quick, and I'm going to go off camera for 30 seconds while you do that.
So once again, what's happening here is we got the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, and realize that the Virginia plan came first. James Madison, with excitement, by the way, of this convention, had already laid out what he felt that the Constitution should say. And understand that James Madison, going into this, was a nationalist-minded guy. He, at the time, going into the convention, he believed in a larger, more consolidated government with more concentrated power, and that the large states, of which he was from the biggest one, Virginia, should basically have the tightest grip on the puppet strings. And the small states are like, yeah, no, you're going to gobble us up. You're going to create this overpowering government only controlled by the big states. We want to make sure that our voice is heard. We want to make sure that the smaller states have a voice as well. And the large states are like, yeah, but there's more of you by one. You're going to dictate. So you little guys are going to dictate to us what's going on. And as Warhamster so aptly pointed out, and we're the ones flipping the bill. And so you've got this battle of extreme. I want this. No, I want this. And you say something about other issues too that I've kind of adopted for myself sometimes in certain discussions. Two things can be true at the same time.
And they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This is Governor Morris of Pennsylvania. He's going to go on a pretty long rant, but he's going to say some really interesting things in this paragraph. So pay attention, people.
Governor Morris, fascinating guy. All right. I'm buckled in because I'm nervous here.
You have a reason to be. Okay. He had no resolution unalterably fixed except to do what should finally appear to him right. He was against the report because it maintained the improper constitution of the second branch and made it another Congress a mere wisp of straw. It had been said by Mr. Gary that the new government would be partly national, partly federal, that it ought in the first quality to protect individuals, in the second, the states. All right, so he's hitting on one of the most important issues of this.
Yeah, and understand here, he just defined the difference between national and federal. Right? National, you've got the one encompassing, and you got federal where the states have a voice. All right, go ahead.
But in what quality was it to protect the aggregate interest of the whole? Among the many provisions which had been urged, he had seen none for supporting the dignity and splendor of the American empire. The what?
I have found it fascinating that the Hamiltonians and the big state guys use the term empire more than anybody else.
I think it's the first time the word empire was used at this this entire convention, but it just jumped off.
I think Hamilton used it at one point too, but here's the thing. There was different views of what they meant by empire. The Hamiltonians, they wanted it to be an empire. Now, hey, man, if you're in a world of empires, you got Britain, you got France, you got Spain, you better be an empire. And people like Madison and Benjamin Franklin developed more of the idea of, yes, we'll become an empire, but not one of conquer, but one of emulation. Everybody will want to be like us. And so they kind of toyed with the term also. And I always wondered if it was to kind of play games to kind of throw the word empire back into the Hamiltonians' faces. But so I understand using the word in a sense, because you got to take off your 2026 hat and put on your 1787 hat. Understand the world they're in. They are surrounded by empires, and all of them want a piece of this prosperity that's going on in
Now,
what in these wayward colonies, those petulant colonies that think they're a country. And so so some of them truly believe, hey man, you got to fight fire with fire. Go ahead.
Surrounded by ravenous wolves. It had been one of the greatest misfortunes that the great objects of the nation, there's that word, had been sacrificed constantly to local views. In like manner as the general interest of the states had been sacrificed to those of the counties. I mean, this is the nationalist argument.
Yeah. He's fearful these states will be a problem, having their own ideas.
What is to be the check in the Senate? None, unless it be to keep the majority of the people from injuring particular states. But particular states ought to be injured for the sake of a majority of the people, in case their conduct should deserve it.
This goes back to what I was saying earlier about the negative. He is one of those that believes that this new Congress should be able to negative even state laws for internal issues. Go ahead.
Suppose they should insist on claims evidently unjust and pursue them in a manner detrimental to the whole body. Suppose they should give themselves up to foreign influence.
Now, stop here for a second. I wonder, and I know the answer, but I wonder if he's kind of referring to those southern states a little bit. Just a wonder.
Ought they be protected in such cases? They were originally nothing more than colonial corporations.
Ah, there's that word again. Mm-hmm. Colonial corporations. So you got to understand the word corporation here. And I know there's some of you out there who go, corporation. Settle down. The word corporation basically means something that's under the control of a bigger body. In the sense of the colonies, they were under the tight control of the crown. They were nothing more than corporations. They were nothing more than entities owned by and controlled by the larger. Yeah, and so the question comes down to, should the states be no different once we get this done?
Yeah, the crown owned everything. They would send a bunch of people out there, businessmen, because these are all entrepreneurs, out to say Maryland, say this is going to be the Maryland Corporation. Go out and set up your plantations, and the gold will come back to the crown because we're mercantilist. But they were every one of the colonies was a business endeavor. On the Declaration of Independence, a government was to be formed. The small states, aware of the necessity of preventing anarchy and taking advantage of the moment, they took advantage, Doug, extorted from the large ones an equality of votes. Interesting phrase. Standing now on that ground, they demand under the new system greater rights as men than their fellow citizens of the large states.
This sounds like a particular ideology of today, does it not?
It sure does.
Okay, go ahead.
Democracy. The proper answer to them is that the same necessity of which they formerly took advantage does not now exist, and that the large states are at liberty now to consider what is right, rather than what may be expedient. Well, we let you have your equality when we had to have you in here because we're getting ready to go to war, but now that things have settled down, we're going to basically use our larger population base and bully you around, is what he's saying.
Yeah, so freedom and liberty, as long as we're in control of it.
We must have an efficient government, and if there be an efficiency in the local governments, the former is impossible.
So, in other words, getting back to your two things can be true at once. Well, he's saying a federal government or national government cannot operate if the local governments are doing their own thing. There must be control somewhere. Either they're in control or we are.
Forget about a division of powers. Yeah. And then he says, Germany alone proves it. Germany at the time is made up of a bunch of fractured principalities. Notwithstanding their common diet, notwithstanding the great prerogatives of the emperor as head of the empire, and his vast resources as sovereign of his particular dominions, no union is maintained. Foreign influence disturbs every internal operation, and there is no energy whatever in the general government. Whence does this proceed? From the energy of the local authorities, from its being considered of more consequences to support the Prince of Hesse than the happiness of the people of Germany.
In other words, set aside your pettiness of wanting any voice for yourself and just bow, because you know what? That's the best for everybody. Just bow.
For the greater good, Doug.
Yeah, the greater good. This is a very what he's saying is a very collectivistic thing. If those out there have not picked up on this, and I've been arguing since before I met Warhamster, one of the key issues in America today and in the world throughout history is individualism versus collectivism. It always comes down to that.
And I've always said it's individual liberty versus tyranny, because as soon as you get to collectivism, you eventually go down a slippery slope to tyranny.
Right.
So we're saying the same thing. Do gentlemen wish this to be ye case here? Good God, sir! Is it possible that they can so delude themselves? How dare them? What if all the charters and constitutions of the states were thrown into the fire, and all of their demagogues into the ocean? What would be the
I'm wondering if at this point he's pounding his desk. But anyway, continue, please.
That's how I'm reading it as. Good God, sir! What would it be to the happiness of America? And will not this be the case here if we pursue the train in which the business lies? We shall establish an Aulic council without an emperor to execute its decrees. The same circumstances which unite the people here unite them in Germany. They have there a common language, a common law, common usages and manners, and a common interest in being united. Yet their local jurisdictions destroy every tie. The case was the same for the Grecian states. The United Netherlands are at this time torn in factions.
Now stop here for a second. What's interesting is what he's accusing is actually a lot part of it was caused by what he's kind of calling for, which is because when you have this consolidation, it creates unsettlement below, right? And then you have the divisions. When it comes to the Grecian states, also one of their biggest problems was democracy also. But anyway, continue, please.
I like the fact that the United Netherlands are at this time torn in factions. There's that word again.
Mm-hmm.
With these examples before our eyes, shall we form establishments which must necessarily produce the same effects? It is of no consequences from what districts the second branch shall be withdrawn, if it be so constituted as to yield an asylum against these evils. As it is now constituted, he must be against its being drawn from the states in equal portions. But shall he was ready to join in devising such an amendment of the plan as will be most likely to secure our liberty and happiness. So basically saying screw local representation. We've got to basically have a body that looks at the good of the whole. And that doesn't work for many reasons, because they have different economies, different needs, different geography, different populations. They need to be represented differently, and a balanced solution can come out of that.
And in the general sense, consolidating power like that works fine as long as those who are in power are quote unquote benevolent. And the moment you start injecting, that other kind of attitude, yeah.
Doug, what do we know about human nature that's going to tell us?
Yeah, you're drawing from an argument I had recently with somebody. Human nature, the way I like to put it is, and this I think will succinctly explain it. Human nature, we have different attributes. How we draw from them, everybody's different. Someone who's a good leader, someone else could be very bossy, perhaps a tyrant. And we naturally tend towards what we think is best for ourselves. We're very narcissistic in that manner. And so human nature can be a danger and must be controlled, but not through control, but through mechanisms that create a distribution of power in such a way that nobody's tyrannical aspirations can grab hold.
Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the biggest problem, as the general or federal government gets bigger and bigger, it's going to attract people that want to use that power for their own ends. And
Well, it's like I tell people, they say, well, we can't get any good representatives. Well, being a representative in government today, what does it represent? Power. So who's it going to attract? And then those of us who don't desire power, we go, well, I don't want to do that. Well, guess what? They will. And so you go from statesmen to
Mr. Sherman and Ellsworth moved to postpone the question on the report of the committee of a member from each state in order to wait for the report of the committee of 5 last appointed. Everyone agrees to postpone. All right, we're going to move to Monday, July 9th. They have taken their Sunday off, and they're coming back on Monday, all fresh and ready to jump into this stuff. All right, first thing we have.
I think this is the week where all hell breaks loose. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, Mr. Daniel Carroll from Maryland took a seat, and I want to take a little diversion and talk about Daniel Carroll because he's an interesting guy. So I'm just reading from his Wikipedia page just to make it easy. Daniel Carroll, I'll just go ahead and read it. I'll share that. Daniel Carroll, 1737-96, was one of the founding fathers of the United States, a Maryland politician and a plantation owner. He supported the American Revolution, served in the Confederation Congress, and was a delegate at the Philly Convention, which he just showed up at, which penned the Constitution. He's a U.S. representative of the First Congress, one of 5 men to sign both the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. He was one of the few Catholics among the founders. Grew up in Maryland, wealthy plantation, blah, blah, blah. Toured around Europe, educated in France. His younger brother, John, was the first Catholic bishop in the United States and founder of Georgetown University. The Carrolls were a very wealthy Maryland family. That is about as blue blood Maryland as it gets. In the 1770s, Carroll gradually joined the Patriot cause. As a slaveholder and large landholder, he was initially concerned that the revolution might fail economically and bring about his family's financial ruin and mob rule, which is what happened in the French Revolution 13 years later. At the time, Maryland, though Catholic founded, had, like the rest of the 13 colonies, issued laws excluding Catholics from holding public office. When Maryland declared its independence from the Crown and enacted its first constitution, it's an important point, people, these states had their own constitutions. These laws were nullified. Carroll was elected to the Maryland Senate from 1777 to 81. As a state senator, he helped raise troops and money for the American cause. His involvement in the Revolutionary War, like that of other patriots and his extended family, was inspired by the family's motto, strong in faith and war. He led the effort to block the state assembly from ratifying the Articles of Confederation until the states that had western land claims, which Maryland did not, ceded those claims to Congress.
This is the Northwest Territory, folks, he's talking about.
Yeah. He didn't want those states to become so much bigger.
And Maryland was the main holdout. They got Delaware to join them, and I think another state or two, New Jersey, I think. But Maryland was the main holdout. Hence, Mr. Carroll. Go ahead.
Carroll dropped his opposition only after Virginia relinquished its claims on the land north of the Ohio River to Congress, and on February 1781, Maryland became the 13th and final state to ratify the Articles. 1787, he's a delegate. Like his good friend James Madison, he was convinced that a strong central government was needed to regulate commerce among the states and with other nations. And we kind of agree with that, because there was chaos at the time. States were throwing burdensome tariffs on each other, and we didn't want 13 different states negotiating 13 different treaties with the European nations. He also spoke out repeatedly in opposition to the payment of members of the United States Congress by the states, reasoning that such compensation would sabotage the strength of the new government because the dependence of both houses on the state legislature would be complete. The new government in this form is nothing more than a second edition of the Continental Congress in 2 volumes, instead of 1, and perhaps with very few amendments. When it was suggested that the president, the executive branch, should be elected by the Congress, Carroll, seconded by James Wilson, moved that the words "by the legislature" be replaced with "by the people." He and Thomas Fitzsimmons are the only Catholics to sign the Constitution, but their presence was a sign of the continued advancement of religious freedom in America. Carroll played an essential role in formulating the limitation of the powers of the federal or central government. He was the author of the presumption enshrined in the Constitution as a closing article that powers not specifically delegated to the federal government were reserved to the states or to the people. So that alone puts him on a Hall of Fame, right?
Well, yes and no. He was a fence rider on a lot of these things. We'll get to that. Go ahead.
Spoke about 20 times in the summer debates. Served on the Committee of Postponed Matters. Returned to Maryland after the convention. He campaigned for ratification of the Constitution, but was not a delegate to the Maryland State Convention for ratification. His political career was not that exciting, and he would die in 1796, like maybe 10 miles from where my father grew up.
So he often spoke out of both sides of his mouth. He was one who claimed he wanted the people to have a voice, but at the same time, during the convention, he also pushed for federal veto power over state laws, a nationalist position, a broader federal authority, a nationalist position. And he wanted the executive and the legislature to have stronger positions. And so in many ways, he was like Hamilton. That said, he wasn't the extreme. So in a sense, he was real close to the middle. If ever there was a moderate that leaned leftward a little bit, he's the guy.
Yeah, that last little bit of, reserving the powers to the states, it makes him a federalist, a true federalist, small f, in my mind. But yeah, I could live with his point of view for the most part.
He had a lot of good things to say.
All right, let's jump back in. Gouverneur Morris delivered a report of the committee of 5 members to whom was committed the clause in the report of the committee consisting of a member of each state, from each state, stating the proper ratio of representatives in the first branch to be as 1 to every 48,000 inhabitants, as follows. Here's what he's going to read. The committee to whom the first was referred beg leave to report that in the first meeting of the legislature of the first branch consisting of 56 members, which is arbitrary, of which number New Hampshire shall have 2, Massachusetts 7, and so on down the line. And you can see here that Virginia's got 9, Pennsylvania 8. Those are the biggest states. Massachusetts 3rd with 7. Little Delaware with 1. I don't think Rhode Island's mentioned, are they?
Each of the Carolinas and New York with 5 each.
And I could pull the map up again. We'll do that next week. But as the present situation of the states may probably alter as well in point of wealth as in the number of their inhabitants, that the legislature be authorized from time to time to augment the number of representatives. So those are not fixed numbers. And in case any of the states shall hereafter be divided, or any 2 or more states united, or any new states created within the limits of the United States, the legislature shall possess authority to regulate the number of representatives in any of the foregoing cases upon the principles of their wealth and number of inhabitants. They're still hanging on to that tax base.
Well, the nobility were the rich ones. They're kind of sticking to that nobility kind of mindset.
Well, it's also the stake in the game. Like I said,
this is true.
The very first state constitution was New Hampshire, and they divided up their Senate on tax receipts, not by population.
And they also allowed all all residents, the opportunity to vote if they could prove they had, a minimum amount of property. And that included not only women, but blacks, free blacks.
Mr. Sherman wished to know on what principles or calculations the report was founded. It did not appear to correspond with any rule of numbers or any requisition hitherto adopted by Congress. Yes, it was arbitrary. All right, Explain your work. Explain your math. Show your work. Mr. Gorham, some provision of this sort was necessary in the outset. The number of blacks and whites with some regards to supposed wealth was the general guide. Fractions could not be observed. The legislature is to make alterations from time to time as justice and propriety may require. Two objectives prevailed against the rate of one member for every 40,000 inhabitants. The first was that the representation would soon be too numerous. The second, it means we'd have too many Congress critters. That's
Too big of a bureaucracy. Yeah.
The second, that the Western states who may have a different interest might, if admitted on that principle by degrees, outvote the Atlantic.
No, we don't want those Westerners telling us what to do. Sorry.
Both of these objections are removed. The number will be small in the first instance and may be continued so.
Now, you understand, and Mr. Gorham is a fascinating person as it is. He's basically saying, hey, we're starting this. We shouldn't lose our grip on the power as the Atlantic coast.
He's from Massachusetts, and they kind of think that they're the ones who, are the most important state for the revolution. They're already the Boston Brahmins.
Those rabble rousers.
Yeah. The blue bloods. Well, remember, a lot of the old money of Massachusetts, they were basically pretty loyal. They were loyalists to England. They didn't fight a lot of this old blood money.
Right.
They still consider themselves English. And the Atlantic states, having a government in their own hands, may take care of their own interests by dealing out the right of representation in safe proportions to the Western states. These were the views of the committee. Yeah, we'll give you guys a little bit of representation, but not enough.
The image that bounced in my head was them having a feast. And by the way, there's a few crumbs that might fall on the floor. Go ahead, Western states. You can have those crumbs. That's the way I kind of took it.
Yeah, I can't help but think about Hunger Games. The one powers in the capital and the provinces can have a little bit of nibbles out of our hand. Mr. Luther Martin wished to know whether the committee were guided in the ratio by the wealth or number of inhabitants of the states or both, noticing its variations by former apportionments by Congress. Morris and Rutledge moved to postpone the first paragraph relating to the number of members to be allowed each state in the first instance, and to take up the second paragraph authorizing the legislature to alter the number from time to time according to wealth and inhabitants. The motion was agreed to. Question of the second paragraph taken without any debate. Aye, no, aye, ayes have it. Mr. Sherman moved to refer to the first part apportioning the representatives to a committee of a member from each state. We'll get the 12 of you in the room. Remember, Rhode Island's not here. New Hampshire's not here yet either, but there's only 11 there right now. Governor Morris seconded the motion, observing that this was the only case in which such committees were useful. Williamson thought it would be necessary to return to the rule of numbers, but that the Western states stood on different footing. If their property shall be rated as high as that of the Atlantic states, then their representation ought to hold a like proportion. Otherwise, if their property was not to be equally rated. It's an interesting point. Are you letting new states in as little redheaded stepchildren or as equal members of the Union? Governor Morris is doing a lot of speaking these last couple of days. The report is little more than a guess. Wealth was not altogether disregarded by the committee, where it was apparently in favor of one state whose numbers were superior to the numbers of another. By a fraction only, a member extraordinary was allowed to the former, and so vice versa. The committee meant little more than to bring the matter to a point for the consideration of the House.
Just for a moment here. So he says, well, this is a little bit more than a guess. Well, yeah, we're creating something that's never existed before. It is a guess. It's an educated guess. It's a good guess based on history. But yeah, it's a guess. It's okay. All right, go
ahead. This is Mr. Reed, George Reed. It's actually spelled R-E-A-D. He asked, that's why Georgia was allowed 2 members when her number of inhabitants had stood below that of Delaware. Governor Morris says, such is the rapidity of the population of that state that before the plan takes effect, it will probably be entitled to 2 representatives.
So in other words, the number was come up with based on current population growth.
Yes, and Georgia is obviously a much larger state than Delaware.
In the sense of geography, yeah.
Mr. Randolph disliked the report of the committee, but had been unwilling to object to it. He was apprehensive that as the number was not to be changed till the national legislature should please, a pretext would never be wanting to postpone alterations and keep the power in the hands of those who possessed it. He was in favor of the commitment to a member from each state. And that kind of makes sense. You know, if Massachusetts and Virginia have got all the power, why would they ever change?
I understand Mr. Randolph comes from Virginia, big state, but he's also thinking about it.
Patterson from New Jersey, small state, considered the proposed estimate for the future according to the combined rule of numbers and wealth as too vague. For this reason, New Jersey was against it.
Now, remember the New Jersey plan. New Jersey has been at the head of this argument against the Virginia plan. Go ahead.
He could regard Negro slaves in no light but as property. They are no free agents, have no personal liberty, no faculty of acquiring property, but on the contrary are themselves property, and like other property, entirely at the will of the master.
What he's arguing here also is you got to realize that when they talked about Georgia's increasing population, I don't think they were necessarily talking about just the free population. And this is what he's referencing.
Has a man in Virginia a number of votes in proportion to the number of his slaves? And if Negroes are not represented in the states to which they belong, why should they be represented in the general government? What is a true principle of representation? It is an expedient by which an assembly of certain individuals chosen by the people is substituted in place of the inconvenient meeting of the people themselves. If such a meeting of the people was actually to take place, would the slaves vote? They would not. Why then should they be represented? He was also against such an indirect encouragement of the slave trade. There it is, observing that Congress in their act relating to the change of the 8 Articles of Confederation had been ashamed to use the term slaves and had substituted a description.
It did the same thing in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. And that's a friendly reminder, people, we are going to get to when the Constitution is ratified. They actually had a provision in there to end the Atlantic slave trade by 1808.
Notice also slavery is an important issue here during this convention.
Mr. Madison reminded Mr. Patterson of his doctrine of representation, which was in its principle the genuine one, must forever silence the pretensions of the small states to an equality of votes with the large ones. They ought to vote in the same proportion in which their citizens would do. If the people of all the states were collectively met, he suggested as a proper ground of compromise that in the first branch the states would be represented according to their number of free inhabitants, and in the second, which had for one of its primary objects the guardianship of property, according to the whole number, including slaves.
So Madison is not prepared to allow equal representation in one of the houses, but he is willing to make sure that they're different. One represented by only the free inhabitants number and the other by the slaves. What that would do is that would give the second house more strength for the voice of the southern or more agrarian states. So he's starting to realize there needs to be a difference between the houses. We need to balance the factions here. He's just not sure how to do it yet.
Good summary, Douglas. Mr. Butler urged warmly the justice and necessity of regarding wealth in the apportionment of representation. Mr. King had always expected That is, the southern states are the richest. They would not league themselves with the northern unless some respect were paid to their superior wealth. Plantations are responsible for most of the exports. The Northeast was still pretty much a maritime mercantilist economy. They had not industrialized or even thought of that yet. So at the time, the wealth was definitely mostly in the South as opposed to the trading colonies.
And it almost sounds like King is in the back of his mind going, how can we change this? we gotta tip the scales here.
Hey, it wouldn't take them long.
Yeah.
Thanks to a guy by the name of Hamilton. If the latter expect those preferential distinctions in commerce and other advantages which they will derive from the connection, they must not expect to receive them without allowing some advantages in return. 11 out of the 13 states had agreed to consider slaves in the apportionment of taxation, and taxation and representation ought to go together. I love this point.
And it's also something else that's interesting. Those same 11 out of 13 also agreed to leave the anti-slavery language in the Declaration of Independence.
And the two that did not?
South Carolina and Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Their economies were dependent on the plantation lifestyle.
And it's fascinating because when Georgia first became a colony, slavery was actually not allowed in that colony. And Georgia eventually added slavery because South Carolina campaigned for it.
Now, this is such an important point. This is how we got to the 3/5 clause. And people, they weren't saying blacks were 3/5 of the human being. They're saying is if you're going to count your slave population towards representation, you also have to count it towards your tax base. So you get more votes, you also pay more taxes. And that's how they got to that compromise. And that's what the point he made right here in the apportionment of taxation. Taxation and representation ought to go together. That's the point I like.
Mm-hmm.
On the question for committing the first paragraph of the report to a member from each state. I, no, ayes have it. They basically just agree.
South Carolina was a no, New York was a no. That's an interesting, those are interesting bedfellows, just put it that way.
And what they just voted on is we're going to send one representative from each state off to a committee to figure out how we're going to divvy up the apportionment of Congress. Instead of just making it an arbitrary number, let's come up with a formula. The committee is appointed. I'm not going to go through the names, and they are adjourned for the day, which is probably a pretty good place to cut off. So we're right at the 1 hour mark.
Okay.
Pretty Let's just see what we're going to start on the next day. We're going to have a report from the committee. We'll get to that later. I don't want to dive in. It's going to get too interesting. Yeah, we're at the 58-minute mark. That's a pretty good place to stop today.
All right, very good.
Pretty interesting day, though.
Yes.
You know, they're making progress. They're you've seen the dumber ideas not resurface, and the good ideas they're kind of whittling down around the edges.
Right, and the ultimate good ideas, you don't necessarily see them completely forming yet, but you can see the beginnings of it. Absolutely, is what you were saying, and it is a fascinating process. And continue to pay attention to people like Madison, who are starting to realize that a federal form of government is better than a national form. And this is where, when I get into these conversations, also, I want to remind people, when we say federalist, we mean federal government, constitution, not Federalist Party. People get confused between the two.
Yeah, that's why I always say small f Federalist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I said, if I was alive back then, I would have been an anti-Federalist. We were actually the Federalists. So that's, blame Hamilton. He's the one who started the Federalist Papers, and he was a nationalist.
Read my book, 7 Worst Constitutional Liars. You will not like Hamilton anymore. Trust me.
It's good stuff. Well, I don't already. So you already sold me on that one a long, long time ago.
I don't have enough words to describe how I feel about Hamilton sometimes. But anyway, Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's the part that gets me, and when Donald Trump goes out there and he praises Abraham Lincoln because Lincoln's in the same camp as Hamilton. They're both nationalists,
Yeah.
and it just drives me nuts. Um, but what are you gonna do? That's the history they were taught. And if you're going to be a Republican president, you got to be for the Republican Party. All of its sins, historical and current, be damned. And I think if you're going to be a true patriot, you look at the different factions: the Republicans, Democrats, Federalists, what were they? Democratic, Republicans. All the different factions over time, they all had flaws. And the bottom line is federalism, small f federalism, states' rights, adherence to the original intent of the Constitution. That is the path towards long-lasting peace and prosperity.
As I like to tell people, I am a constitutionalist and a Christian first. The only reason why I'm a member of the GOP is because they agree with me more often than the other one.
Yeah, and I think the way I describe it is I can't stand either of the major political parties, but I find that the Republicans are forced to listen to their voters a little bit more, and I have a tendency to agree with Republican voters more than I do with blue city, quote unquote, Democrats. So that's where it's where I align more with the Republican voters, not that I necessarily agree with the party, which is why I've, my registration besides one day of my life has always been independent or libertarian.
One day of your life?
Yeah, in New Hampshire, you can switch parties for a primary, so I registered as a Republican for one day, or actually for about 10 minutes. Because, they want you registered to vote, mess with someone else's primary, and then they unregister you immediately. And they're really good at it. Those election workers are really well trained. So, what's the point of having a party if you can just flip flop in on the same day? But that's New Hampshire for you. All right, Doug, tell everyone where they can find you.
DouglasVGibbs.com. I write pretty much every day. Got some things that I'm working on to add to it. My classes that have been, pretty much over for the last 2 years, I was just, matter of fact, talking on a website guy. Well, I talked, he hadn't answered yet, about how I can do this. I want to make sure that we start the classes up again. I used to charge $10 per person per session. How about $9 a month? And you have access to 2 or 3 classes a week where we start going through the Constitution, but in more detail than I even did before. That's coming.
Are you going to want me to help you on those?
Perhaps. Let's. Right now, I'm in the formulation stage on how I want to do it, but perhaps.
I know it's always helpful for you to have a peanut gallery, but let's see what you come up with. I mean, you've taught. I've seen you teach the classes in a couple of different formats, so let me know what you're thinking, and I'm available to help out if asked.
All right, very good. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Until next time, cheers.